Today, we're diving into one of the most devastating events in all of human history, the First World War. But we're not just looking at how it all kicked off in 1914. We're also going to look at how, a full century later, a whole nation decided to remember it. And not with parades and victory laps, but with something much deeper. It's really a story in two acts, the disaster itself and how we choose to remember it.
I mean, just listen to this. On the very brink of the war, guys like the British Foreign Secretary Edward Grey could feel what was coming. It's this chilling sense of dread. He knew this wasn't some small conflict, it was a catastrophe, and they were all walking straight into it. His words just perfectly capture that feeling, right? An entire continent about to be plunged into darkness, with no idea if the light would ever come back on.
And that darkness had a price. A staggering one. That abstract sense of doom became horrifyingly real. 17 million dead. Soldiers, civilians, it's a number so huge you can barely wrap your head around it. A scar that would define the entire 20th century.
So how on earth did this happen? Well, a war like this doesn't just pop up out of thin air. For decades, Europe had basically been a giant powder keg, just filled with tension, jealousy, and fear. All it needed was one little spark to set the whole thing off.
Think of it like a really toxic recipe with four main ingredients. First, you've got this messy web of military alliances, where everyone promised to have everyone else's back. Second, there was this mad scramble for colonies and power around the globe. Third, you had this huge surge in nationalism, with every country thinking they were the best. And what was fueling all this? A massive arms race that made war feel not just possible, but pretty much guaranteed.
So by 1914, Europe was split right down the middle into two heavily armed camps. You had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and facing off against them was the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. This whole setup created a devastating domino effect. A fight between any two of them could drag everybody else in, ready or not.
And the 10 years before the war were just one close call after another. It was like a series of dress rehearsals. You had showdowns in Morocco, Austria-Hungary annexing Bosnia, which made Serbia and its big brother, Russia, furious. Each one of these crises just pushed everyone closer and closer to the edge, until there was basically no room left to de-escalate.
So after years of all this tension just simmering under the surface, that spark finally landed. One single, shocking act in a city called Sarajevo was about to light the fuse on the whole powder keg. The possibility of war was about to become a terrible reality. And here it is, June 28, 1914. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Now, for Austria-Hungary, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a direct challenge from their rival Serbia. And frankly, it was the perfect excuse to settle the score once and for all.
What happens next is this fatal chain reaction that almost seems like it's on autopilot. First, Germany gives Austria-Hungary what's called a blank check, basically saying, do whatever you want to Serbia, we've got your back. So Austria issues this insane list of demands to Serbia that they know will be rejected. When Serbia says no to some of it, boom, Austria declares war. That forces Russia, Serbia's ally, to start mobilizing its huge army. That mobilization spooks Germany, whose only war plan involves attacking France through Belgium. And that invasion of a neutral country is the final domino that pulls Great Britain into the war. The whole thing was a runaway train, and the military timetables just crushed any chance for diplomacy.
The war turned into a 4-year meat grinder that completely redrew the map of the world and left behind this deep collective trauma. Which leads us to a really important question. After a disaster that cost 17 million lives, 100 years later, how do you even begin to remember it?
Okay, let's fast forward 100 years to 2014. The United Kingdom kicks off one of the most ambitious commemoration projects, well, ever. And the goal wasn't just to lay some wreaths and have a moment of silence. The goal was to completely change how the entire country thought about its own history. And this wasn't just a random collection of events either. They had a deliberate strategy, this theory of change. The idea was to do more than just recall facts. It was to use funding and projects to spark actual reflection, to get people to connect with the history, and ultimately to leave a permanent impact on how the nation understood the war. And the goals here were completely different from anything they'd done before. Right off the bat, they tossed out the old winners and losers story. They were committed to being politically neutral and focusing on the human cost, the personal stories. The plan was to use art, history, and education to get everyone involved, to spotlight the huge role Commonwealth countries played, and maybe most importantly, to build a new legacy of understanding for young people.
So, to pull off these big goals, the Centennial program got really creative, and the results were, frankly, incredible. They reached tens of millions of people in ways that old-school memorials never could have.
Media was obviously a huge part of it, and the BBC's coverage was just massive. I mean, this chart gives you a little peek at the scale. Over 27 million people watched the opening events. Millions more tuned in for documentaries and live coverage of key moments like the Battle of the Somme and the Armistice. This literally brought the centenary into living rooms all over the country.
But it went way beyond TV. The arts program, which was called 1418 Now, was a total game changer. It funded 107 different projects around the UK, and all told, they engaged an unbelievable 35 million people. And that focus on young people, it paid off big time. There was this one project, Legacy 110, where students who visited the battlefields had to go back and share what they learned with their communities. By the end of the 4 years, that project alone had reached over 15 million people. But you know, if there's one thing that really captured the spirit of this whole new approach, it was this one art project. It was called We're Here Because We're Here. It was a total surprise, just for one day. Imagine you're on your way to work, you're in a train station or a mall, and suddenly you see men dressed in World War I uniforms, just standing there, silently. They're not performing, they're just there, like ghosts from the past. The power of this thing was just immense. 2 million people saw it live, in person, and then it just exploded online. 340 million social media impressions. See, each of the 1,400 volunteers represented a real soldier who had died on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme. They wouldn't say a word, but if you went up to them, they'd hand you a small card, and on that card was the soldier's name, his age, and his regiment. It was so personal and so incredibly powerful. And the public reaction just says it all. This quote really nails it. It took history out of the dusty books and off a screen and put it right there in front of you, a living, breathing thing. You couldn't just walk past it. You couldn't ignore it.
So when it's all said and done, what's the lasting legacy here of the war itself and its massive effort to commemorate it? What does it tell us about why history matters? And more importantly, how we decide to engage with it?
I think the big takeaway is this. The centenary actually managed to reframe the entire story of the First World War. It shifted the conversation away from this grand story of empires and generals and battle plans, and it focused it back on the human experience, on the stories of individuals, of families, of communities, and of the incredibly personal nature of loss. And ultimately, that leaves us with a really powerful idea to chew on. History isn't just a static list of things that happened. It's a living story, and it's shaped by the things we choose to remember and the stories we choose to tell. In 2014, the story was about empathy and human connection, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? 100 years from now, what stories will they tell about us?